Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I like to react to your hot takes concerning my favorite games. And recently, I put out a call to arms, or a call to cringe if you want to call it, asking for your hottest, spiciest takes concerning what has become one of my favorite games of all time, Metaphor Refantazio, Atlus's latest and greatest RPG. And I don't think it'll come as a surprise that one of the most talked about takes I saw pop up time and time again was concerning Metaphor Refantazio's lack of romance options or just content. Some people wanted it, some people were glad it wasn't there. And I think it's such a big topic when it concerns Metaphor Refantazio that it deserves its own video, and that's what I want to do today. I want to discuss Metaphor Refantazio, why I don't personally mind that it doesn't have romance options, and also I want to segue this into a critique of Persona, which is another one of my favorite franchises. So let's sit back, relax, and talk about some good games, shall we? So that this technically qualifies as a hot take video that I do, and seeing as this will be the only take I cover in today's video, let's begin with @BenjaminQuinn1184. I'm happy that romance isn't in Metaphor. It's not Persona, guys, come on. Now, depending upon how and where you fall on this issue, you may not realize just how big of a deal or how not big of a deal this could be for other people. I don't think it comes as much of a surprise that for a lot of people out there, they are going from Persona to Metaphor Refantazio, and these games share a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the scheduling, the calendar system, the overworld activities, the overall flow and kind of pace of the game, it's very reminiscent to Persona. Things like royal virtues being social stats, followers being social links. There is a lot of crossover here. Metaphor is able to make it all of its own and have its own unique identity and spin on all of that stuff, and I think it does a really good job of doing that. But I can understand why, if you're coming from Persona and you already see a lot of these similarities, having one of the biggest, most glaring, most talked about elements of Persona just not being present will at least make you feel a certain way. Now, I do agree with Benjamin in this take. I don't mind that Metaphor does not have romance. I'm not, going to argue that it makes it a better game, it's just a different game, and I don't think Metaphor Refantazio, with the way this game is constructed, necessarily needed romance options. Though I do kind of find it funny, when you, take a step back and look at the industry on the whole, some of the biggest games out there have, romance systems in one way or the other. One of the biggest examples of this is Baldur's Gate 3, and just who you romanced is a massive point of conversation in that gaming community. I went with Karlak, by the way. Though in the co-op playthrough I did with a buddy, I went with Minthara, yeah? Another massive game out there that has a romance system is Cyberpunk 2077. I went with Panem. The point I'm trying to make is that for a lot of people out there, I don't think these systems are necessarily insignificant, and you on a personal level may not really desire systems like this or get much out of them, but there's other people out there that get a lot of enjoyment out of having these romance systems. It's just how they enjoy a game. I'm not going to judge in that regard. But I also don't think that not having a romance system necessarily makes it a con in a game like Metaphor Refantazio, because with the way that story is constructed, and I know I put a spoiler warning at the beginning of this video, but I am going to be talking about spoilers in this video. With the way the story is constructed, romance would be more of a side distraction than anything in my opinion, because the main story is just kind of go. Sure, there is a lot of downtime, and I think if they wanted to implement a system into Metaphor Refantazio like that, they could have. I just kind of think it would feel more tacked on than natural. I think it works in Persona because Persona is supposed to double as a high school simulator, with the busy schedule and all the drama that can entail. So a romance system in that game just fits like a glove, because, well, that's just part of high school for a lot of people. And you can choose to engage in that system, unless you're playing an older version of P3, or you can choose to ignore it, and just friend zone everyone if you want. So I think when it comes in terms of overall themes that these respective games are covering, it fits more in line with what Persona is trying to do, because Persona doubles as a high school simulator, and a real-life simulator at that. You're taking part-time jobs, you're grinding up social stats, you're studying for exams, participating in events, going on field trips, hanging out with friends, and eventually possibly forming a romance. It fits with Persona in that regard, while in Metaphor Refantazio, you are on this quest to save the prince and then eventually just become the king and stop Luis. Like I said before, that doesn't necessarily, at least in my eyes, make it completely incompatible with a romance system. It's just not as integral as it would be for Persona. I think one of the reasons I've seen, at least in my experience, quite a few people wish that Metaphor had a romance system is because the characters are just that good. Generally speaking, and I don't have any evidence for this, but it feels like it's common sense to me, when you have characters that are enjoyable to interact with, that can feel relatable or are just likable, people are more inclined to want to have a romance system for those characters than if the characters were just completely unlikable, poorly written, or whatever. Again, look at games like Persona. Atlus is known for how good they are at characterization and character development. Look at games like Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077 that are already brought up. Other elements to those games' success? It's just how good they are at characterization and character development. They're both really dang good, especially Baldur's Gate. And when it concerns Metaphor Refantazio, Atlus did it again. They created a cast of characters that, to me at least, are all likable. More than likable, they're all great. Great voice acting, great development, great introductions. They fit in with the main party and have great interactions with everyone. They're just a really likable group of individuals. And they function together to be a really likable group. And when you have characters that are that likable, people tend to also want to romance those characters because they find the system fun. Especially if you have a favorite character, chances are you can get a few extra scenes and feel as if your playthrough has embraced that character a bit more than the others. I think on a subconscious level, when it comes to romance systems in games, I think part of the reason a lot of people like them is because, kind of what I was just talking about, where if you have a favorite character who's a standout for you, you can romance that character, and that makes your playthrough feel a bit more individualized to your own preferences and tastes. And it's things that sound small like that can have very deep ramifications. I don't think it's mandatory, and I don't think it was needed in Metaphor, but I think because you already have these elements, and they knocked it out of the park so well in regards to characterization, in terms of the story, in terms of the dialogue written, in terms of character design, especially when a massive chunk of your player base likely comes from Persona that shares a lot of these similarities in these aspects, people are going to want a romance system. So I can understand where they're coming from. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons why Metaphor did not include it. One, like I said before, the story doesn't necessarily call for it to the same level that Persona does. And it'll be interesting to see in the future if they ever want to follow this story up, because the ending does kind of leave off on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Not really, right? Like, it's not panty and stocking cliffhanger, but if you want to follow this story up, you can, because the game ends with the gang going on another adventure. You can easily have something else happen on that journey with these characters, and unlike in Persona, where for a mainline game we've never had a follow-up with the exact same cast, again I said mainline game, because even when we do a follow-up with that cast in a spin-off game, they just ignore any romance ramifications you may have had in the base game. If they want to do a follow-up to Metaphor Refantazio with this exact same cast of characters, maybe there's a canon relationship they want to hone in on, or in that follow-up game, that's where they would do it. There's a good chance I'm overthinking it, but I find that kind of fun. Try and get in the heads of these writers and these developers to find out what they may be going for or whatnot. But the funny thing I kind of find when it concerns Persona and just how talked about the romance system is in that game, honestly, maybe this is my hot take, romance in Persona is kind of lame. And what do I mean by this? Like, look at how long these games are and just how few scenes there really are in regards to the romance systems. P3 especially, like, what do you even get in that game? Like, Christmas and the Culture Festival, and then you can do the odd dates on, like, days off, but why would you do that? It's a waste of a time slot. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of funny. Engaging in the romance system after you romance the character can feel as if it's a waste of time, which is something I've always found funny about Persona. And then in 4 and 5, you get the Valentine's dates, which can be really funny, especially the ham roots. Or they can have some rather touching scenes. No, not in that way. Come on, focus up. We're trying to have a deep discussion about game design over here. Come on. There's no room for fun in this corner of the internet. But like, I digress. Most of the time, you romance someone at the rank 9 social link or confidant. If you romance them, that changes your rank 10. You may get a couple of scenes throughout a few key events of the main story. Like in P4, you have the ski resort trip scenario right before the Marie dungeon. P5, funnily enough, I think gives you the most, because you have the Hawaii bit, which is not necessarily a romance thing, but it's kind of supposed to fulfill that role. You have the school festival, obviously Valentine's, Christmas, but again, compare that to the length of the game proper. It's really not that big of a slice of the pie in terms of what you are doing within the game compared to everything else, but it's been such a big element to the community surrounding these games, and I find that relatively fascinating. I think it goes to show just how important characterization can be for a lot of people when it concerns a story on the whole, and that's not necessarily only the big plot beats and the pacing of the story and all that people gravitate to. One of the biggest elements people gravitate to when it comes to stories is just the characters. And if you have really likable and fun characters that people like to be around and interact with, that has a lot of staying power, especially in a game like Metaphor Refantazio. Because even that game without romance options has scenes and scenarios where you can pick one of the party members to spend a little bit of extra time with. And it kind of feels like a light romance system, at least in the way and style that Persona handles it. It's actually funny because the more I think about it when it concerns Persona at least, the romance system feels so disconnected from the main story going on because it's rarely ever referenced. I think the game that, funnily enough, kind of integrates it the best is Persona 3, despite, like I talked about before, having probably the worst or just lamest romance system, just because of the lack of things to do with it. Because of Episode Igus, because Makoto dies at the end of P3, and Episode Igus / The Answer's all about the rest of C's learning to cope with the death of Makoto. If you romance any of the members of C's, I can see that adding a lot to the emotional gravitas of what's happening in Episode Igus. Because in that case, it's not just a matter of, at least for one of those characters, or it's P3, it could be all of them losing a dear friend, but they could be losing a loved one. Sure, the dialogue doesn't change, but I don't think it has to with how Episode Igus is executed. Because the theme of them learning to overcome the death of the main character, Makoto, still hits hard, and lands even a bit harder and crisper in my opinion if you went with one of them at least to romance. Especially with characters like Yukari or Igus. Again, maybe I'm overthinking it and overanalyzing it, but I'd rather overthink and overanalyze something and gain a new level of appreciation for something than underanalyzing and not really liking something as much as I could. That's just my own perspective on it. But yeah, I think I've talked about this for long enough. My main takeaway is that I don't think Metaphor Refantazio needs a romance system because the way the game is constructed and the type of story that Metaphor is telling, I just don't think it's necessarily mandatory for that game to have a romance system, whereas it kind of is in Persona, because Persona is going for that life sim element. But I can understand where a lot of people are coming from when they say they would like one in Metaphor Refantazio, and I think the topic of romance systems is just really compelling. And there's a lot of elements and angles you can tackle this issue at. Some people are just lonely, some people just find it fun. I don't think any of that stuff necessarily demeans the enjoyment that someone can get out of a system like that, because at the end of the day, video games are supposed to be engaging and possibly even fun, and the way we find fulfillment, engagement, and fun out of something is deeply subjective. It's a fascinating element when it comes to gaming critique, and just analyzing people's reactions to gaming overall. So, leave a comment down below with what character in Metaphor Refantazio would you romance if you had the option, and why is it Fabienne? Thank you all for tuning in. Also, tell me about your thoughts on this whole subject matter. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts and your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you liked the video and you want to see more content. I know I would appreciate it. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.